We've already looked at prayer, love, happiness, and community as keys for life, but we can't overlook the roadblocks we'll face. I'm Brian Patrick, and we explore obstacles in life, this time on Crossing the Goal. Well, it's time to look at the obstacles in life as we continue our series on the keys for life. Our Crossing the Goal team back here to serve you. From Renewal Ministries, Peter Herbeck is vice president of that organization. The founder and president of Focus, Fellowship of Catholic University Students, Curtis Martin, and our coach on Crossing the Goal, who coached in the NFL and was an all-pro wide receiver, Coach Danny Abramowitz. Name a few of these obstacles we're talking about, Coach.
Well, you know, obstacles, guys, we're going to face as long as we live on this earth on a daily basis, and they come in the forms of all kinds of things. Let's take a look at
this
temptations, trials, tribulations. See how much fun we're having already? Sufferings, setbacks, letdowns, blah, 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 blah.
They're just a few.
I think what we need to look at this show is how do we perceive them? How do we look at them? Because sometimes they can become stepping stones.
Yeah, this is where it's great being a Christian when you talk about this kind of stuff, because there's a realism that's right at the heart of what our life is all about. It doesn't avoid and pretend that problems and obstacles aren't there. This passage from Jesus in the Gospels himself, he says, this is John 16, verse 33. He said, I have said this to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I've overcome the world.
Amen.
That's the heart of it all.
16:33, there you go.
Very powerful.
You will have tribulations, but be at peace. Don't worry about it.
And that is the touchstone for everything we're going to discover as we discuss this whole issue, which is really, by definition, what trips us up. What keeps us from being the men we need to be? It's the obstacles we encounter.
Yeah.
And yet we're being told that Christ has overcome the world, and then we find out this amazing thing, and that is that we also can overcome the world. That there are, according to Hebrews chapter 11, verse 38, there are men of whom the world is not worthy. And that's what we're being called to do, to have a spirit of indomitability, which says that I will see no obstacles, but rather I'm going to see opportunities for Christ to work through me in extraordinary ways.
So we're going to man up and face these obstacles with a game plan from Curtis and Peter, next here on Crossing the Goal.
Hello, I'm Curtis Martin. I'm here with Peter Herbeck, and we're looking at the theme of obstacles in life. And we have to take this on because in reality, there are a lot of people who think that Christianity, Catholicism is for wimps, but they're the ones who haven't tried it.
Yeah.
It's actually really tough. In fact, to be able to follow Christ is going to take more than any of us have.
Yeah.
And so we have to learn how to encounter that. So where do we go to find inspiration in the scriptures to understand what the attitude of a man of God, or a man who desires to be a man of God, ought to have when it comes to obstacles?
Good question. Good lead to the St. Peter, chapter 4 of his first letter. This is typical of how the apostles looked at reality and life on this earth, and they got it directly from the Lord, a perspective of how to walk day to day in this world. So here's Peter talking to really a small band of new believers. They're living in a pagan culture. They're just an absolute minority in every way you can think of. They got no money, they got no power, they got no influence, and people don't like them because they're not worshiping the emperor like they're supposed to. So they're causing problems just by virtue of who they are. Okay, so Peter, some are getting martyred. I mean, it's not funny, but it's amazing to think of the perspective of saints.
Well, we know where they end up, so
it's
we
full
can't
of joy.
smile about it.
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely true. So here's verse 12, chapter 4. It says, Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal which comes upon you to prove you. So here's Peter. Don't be surprised. He's heard, he's a pastor, he's heard of the sufferings and the trials and the martyrdom that some people are getting prepared for. And he says, don't be surprised this has come upon you, this fiery ordeal. And they'd say, well, why shouldn't I be surprised? It's not happening to my neighbor. Because the master told you it was coming.
Yeah.
Right? It happened to him and he told you it was going to come. So don't be surprised about this fiery ordeal, because it also, don't let it discourage you, because it has a purpose. And the purpose is to prove you. It's not meaningless. It's not without any purpose, because the master's going to purify you. And he goes on to say very clearly, he says, but he said instead, rejoice insofar as you share in Christ's suffering, that you also might rejoice and be glad when his glory is revealed. So instead of, not only is he saying, don't be surprised and don't be discouraged, he's saying, rejoice. Rejoice because the sufferings are coming upon you in the trials. And what sense does that make?
It doesn't make any sense unless, of course, Jesus is God and he died for us and rose from the dead. I mean, because it really changes everything. So often when I'm dealing with Christianity in my own life and in others, people want to think of Christianity as a slight adjustment on the world's view. It's not a slight adjustment. All bets are off.
Yeah.
If what Jesus is saying is true, then we shouldn't be surprised. Why does he say, don't be surprised?
Yeah.
Because we will be surprised.
Yeah.
He's trying to warn us, don't let it happen.
Right.
Because we keep thinking that we're just slightly more polite people in a culture of relatively polite people. But no, we are in the midst of a world where people are drowning in darkness.
Yeah.
And they are desperately unaware of how to navigate life because of the truth of Christ has not been given to them.
Yeah.
And we've been given it, and when we start to live differently, it starts to bother them and they get angry with us. And we all of a sudden experience obstacles and opposition.
Yeah.
But I love the second part of that passage, Peter, where he's saying, rejoice in his sufferings. Why? Well, it doesn't make any sense to do that unless you know something greater is on its way. And he's saying he's coming again, and he's coming in glory. And that glory will be so great, so amazing, that the suffering by way of comparison will pale in comparison.
And the suffering that you endure, if it's born in Christ, with this kind of attitude, the Lord uses it to purify you. Because what's the Master doing? He's preparing us for the end game. To go home to the Father's house, to see the Father's face, to live with him forever in joy and in glory. And suffering purifies us. And so if we have the right attitude to receive it in Christ, he's going to use it to conform us to him and make us look like him and live like him, purify us, get us ready to see the face of God. So when that time comes, his glory is going to be revealed in us. He's going to say, look, glory's coming forth from Curtis's life because Curtis said yes to me, because Curtis bore up the suffering and let me use it to purify him, and he didn't fight and kick and scream the whole way through.
No, and this imagery actually flows from the Old Testament. St. Peter, as you said, a pastor, is teaching us wisdom. But if we go back to Sirach chapter 2, we see this. He says, my son, if you come forward to serve the Lord, prepare yourself for temptation. Yeah. And he goes on, and I love this image. He says, for as gold is tested in fire, and the acceptable men in the furnace of humiliation, we must trust him, and he will help you. Help you what? Help you become who you're meant to be.
Right, exactly.
You are not who you're meant to be, but you can either be crushed by this world, or you can learn how to become what you're meant to be and be a man of whom the world's not worthy. What the Bible calls saints, what the church has called saints. And I haven't met a guy that doesn't want that. I have met a lot of guys who don't think it's possible. But when we speak this language to college students and they sit back and say, I want to live for something greater than myself. In fact, what I'd love to live for is the greatest good. Can you show me where it is? If you can put that in front of young men, they will run through fire to become what they're meant to be.
The fiery ordeal, they'll run right through it, right? I mean, here's the typical apostolic perspective. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 19. My grace is sufficient for you, and my power is made perfect in your weakness. So this is Paul hearing from the Lord when he was going through a heavy trial and he didn't know what to do, and the Lord said, look, I'm with you. I promised I'd be with you. My power is going to be perfected in that weakness. 1 John chapter 4, verse 4, greater is he that's in me than he that is in the world. So what we need to do is lay hold of these truths, these promises, these rock-solid, unchanging realities, and let them be our foundation and our strength to pass through the trial. And if that's what we do, trusting in these words, trusting in God's promise, he'll perfect us and conform us to the image of Jesus, his son.
And if we know that before the obstacle arises, we'll have the mindset of Christ to encounter it. Amen. Brian?
Thanks, Curtis and Peter. Good game plan. Rejoice in the sufferings. That sounds warm and fuzzy, Coach.
Yeah, easier said than done. You know that.
Yeah, we'll get the real story in the red zone next here on Crossing the Goal. We're in the red zone now on Crossing the Goal, and we're talking in this series on the keys for life. We're talking about obstacles to life. And Danny, sometimes those obstacles seem pretty bad when you're in the middle of them.
You know, a friend of mine told me one time about trials and tribulations. He says, you're either going into one, in one, or coming out of one.
Covering from one.
Yeah.
You know,
Or planning for the next one.
Yeah, exactly. But I can relate in my life personally when, you know, the first time I had to go to AA, and I was in there for a short period of time, and my sponsor came and we went to lunch, and he says, you'll like this, Brian. He says, you know that you're going to be joyful and happy one of these days soon being in AA. I said, and being an alcoholic. I said, are you crazy? Are you nuts? What are you talking about happy? I can't be any more not happy right now with this situation.
Miserable.
He just says, just trust me.
Yeah.
Guess what? Just like that reading, you overcome, you can overcome, I've overcome the world. What happened is, through this process, it wasn't easy, but it did, all of a sudden I said, what a blessing that this has been in my life. It changed my whole life.
It's so interesting you say that.
Did he tell you that to try it for 30 days, and if you didn't like it, they'd refund your misery?
Yeah, they give you your misery.
You know what he did
back.
tell me though? You know, the chips, he says, you probably want a drink. He says, put one in your mouth.
When it melts,
you can have a drink.
Yeah. You know, that's self-inflicted misery, which we often do to ourselves. But also, you know, at Renewal Ministries, we get emails and phone calls every week, you know, from people all around the country and all around the world. It's amazing how much suffering is going on out there in people's lives. How many broken families, broken homes, sick people dying of cancer, you know, kids leaving the church. I mean, there's just tremendous amount of struggle and pain in people's lives, and people can feel like, you know, this is just hard. And I, you know, in my own family situation growing up, I was on the kind of the receiving end of your experience. You were the drink. My father drank like you drank. Yeah. And as a young boy, I remember just even like kindergarten age, just seeing some really bad things, you know what I mean, and things that were traumatizing and difficult. My father was a very good man. He ended up becoming sober at a certain point. He was a politician, and he was a war hero in the Second World War and all that, and fought in Patton's Third Army. He died in the Lord and all of that. But as a young guy, growing up in a dysfunctional home, that produces a lot of trial and difficulty, and the whole world sort of gets turned on its head, and it's difficult to get through, and you end up, things get passed on to you because you're not being protected, and you're getting a distorted view of life and reality, and so it produces suffering and great trial, you know. But that passage I was reading up there where the Lord said to Paul, my power is made perfect in weakness. Yep. It turned out that the very thing that was the biggest problem in our family, once, along with Dad, we all came to the place where we all said, you know, he tried this, that, and the other thing. We tried to, we hide it, we denied it, we did everything, we enabled, we did all those things. We decided to stop and just give it to the Lord at a level we had never done before, which meant first each of us giving our lives to the Lord, really saying, okay, we're powerless over this, but we want you to be at the center of our life. Literally, when we began to do that as a family, everything began to change. Within a year, Dad was into treatment. He stood up 4 weeks later and said, I'm Joe Herbeck, I'm an alcoholic. I can't live without Jesus Christ, basically at the center of my life. 20 years of sobriety, all 7 kids. You know, some of them had stopped going to church or had come back to the church. Mom and Dad have 65 grandchildren or great-grandchildren. Wow. And most of them are really tracking with the Lord. Yes. They're all wonderful young people and wonderful families. And we have difficulties and trials, but it was that thing that humbled us and humiliated us and broke us that brought us together, that could have split us forever.
Yeah, I've seen that story repeated a number of times.
But given it to Christ, he changed it.
Obstacle became a stepping stone.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and that's what we've got. That's the power of because there's going to be obstacles. They're unavoidable. This is a difficult world. In fact, it's a broken, fallen world that is dying. Yeah. And that in a certain sense, Christ coming to earth is a judgment on the earth. Yeah. And we've got to get the word out, but first to ourselves and to others, that if you put all your marbles in this world, you're destined to be a disappointed person. Yeah. But if you can learn how to navigate these obstacles, and with our eyes fixed on Christ, who's the author and perfecter of our faith, who's, we're told, who for the joy set before him endured the cross. Talk about an obstacle. But he was willing to do it because he knew it was on the other side.
But don't you guys think we have to differentiate between obstacles that are going to come up in our lives and self-made misery? I mean, we can make ourselves pretty miserable. Although some obstacles are self-inflicted, there is a difference.
I think another thing is that things happen in our life and we lose the opportunity to get joy and peace out of these trials that we're going to have because we do the why me. Why am I in this? Lord, why?
Yeah,
are you
why did I
giving
get
me this?
dealt
Why
such a
did I
bad
get the
hand?
bad deal? Why
Yeah.
did I do that instead of,
Did you ever think that in your situation?
Sure. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I just had to pass. We all did, in different ways. Why did we have to deal with this? Why did we have to grow up in this kind of situation? I mean, there were so many good things that happened in our life. It wasn't like it was a constant issue with us, but it was there.
Yeah,
It was
I'm
the
sure my
background
daughters
noise of life and all that
experienced
kind of stuff. But I think the Lord. The apostles always show us, and I think we're getting there. You did this with your own, when you had a heart attack.
yeah.
You said you had peace at a certain point because you were prepared for it, and you knew you weren't made for this world.
Right.
That you'd rather stay to be with your grandkids and your wife, but you were ready to go because you knew you were in the hands of the Lord. So what seemed like a meaningless thing and bad timing and just a disaster, you had a totally different perspective on because you had the Lord's perspective now because you knew who He was.
See, you said the key there. Why wasn't I afraid? Why was I calm? Is not because if I was not in the state of grace, if I wasn't walking the walk that I was walking at that time, I would have been so fearful. I wouldn't want a doctor. I'd want a priest. Hey, wait, I need to go to confession before you do anything to me. The reason I wasn't is because I was doing the things, the prayer, all the sacraments, all the things that we following the Lord's way. I think what happens out here is people are not following the Lord's way, and then something comes, and it's like the Lord's punished. He's up there, okay, I got you, Peter, I got you, Curtis, I'll get you, Danny, for this, and Brian, instead of saying, these just happen.
So have you reached the point, any of you guys reached the point where you really rejoice in suffering? That's a tough one.
Go ahead.
Yes. Not in the way I think about at first step, but I will say,
About
for
like,
example,
yippee!
No,
I get to suffer.
but I have been with my wife in prayer, dealing with family tragedies, and sit there and say, because of our shared faith, because we're together in the midst of it, even though we're suffering, there's a happiness there. That doesn't mean that I'm quite ready to say the actual suffering is bringing me joy.
No.
But I so many times go to a Catholic funeral of a faithful Catholic person, you sit back and say, oh my goodness, at the worst times in life, it is really great to be Catholic.
I agree with that.
Another thing dovetailing to that is that the suffering that I've been through, and I'm not saying, I've been doing all these things, poor Danny and all that, but I've gone through some things in my life. But it's enabled me to understand other people that's going through that same thing.
Good
but the
point.
biggest thing is, sometimes I can't say, hey, I know how you feel. But to pray with people, see, we forget about that. A lot of times, if we lay hands on people and just pray, hey, do you mind if I pray with you? I can tell you're heavily burdened. This is tough. You just lost a loved one. You're dealing with this. You just lost a job. Something's happening in your life. Can I pray with you? And most people are open to that.
Yeah. I mean, you could feel like at times things happen to you. So this makes no sense whatsoever. Why is this happening to me in my life right now? I've been walking the good walk. I've been doing this and that.
Right.
And I think that the words of St. Peter are really important where he says, this is purifying you, this trial. Mm-hmm. And every trial in life can be, from a Catholic perspective, that's why I love being Catholic, is you see every trial in life can be a moment of grace. Because what I can do is I give this to the Lord, the fact that it's confounding my mind, the fact that it's so difficult to figure out, I just give it to Him day by day. It's hard to do. And He says, rejoice. So I'm going to say, I'm going to thank you for this today. I don't feel it. I don't have all this spontaneous stuff. But Lord, I'm deciding today to say thank you, even in this trial right now, because I know you have a plan. And His plan is to perfect us and get ready to see the Father. That's what He's doing.
He has a plan.
Yeah.
Out of every kind of trial, tribulation, whatever, suffering, whatever it is, a good will always come out of it.
Yeah.
It might not be immediately. You may not see it right away.
His plans are
down
for
the
good.
road.
Yeah.
The plan is the best plan for us at that time.
Yeah.
And you said at the start of the show, John 15 or 16:33. Jesus said, "You will face tribulation, but we get to face it with Him." I mean, look what He went through.
Right. He says that in the line right before. They said, basically Jesus said, even though my friends are leaving me in my trial, I'm not alone. The Father's with me, and that's what He passes on to us: the ability to say, I'm not alone, even though I might feel totally isolated and lost. He's got me right in the palm of His hand. Even though I can't see it and feel it, I'm trusting Him, and He's going to bring me to a place of safety. He's going to bring me home to my Father's house.
All right, we push into the end zone next here on Crossing the Goal. We'll get the last word on these obstacles in life and dig into the email bag. Hope to stay with us. We've crossed the goal into the end zone. We're talking about obstacles in life as we continue our series on Keys for Life. Before we get the final word from our Crossing the Goal team members, we're going to go to the email bag for a second. This could be classified under obstacles. Jonathan says, I'm a 40-year-old father with 2 boys, ages 10 and 8. He said that we have a stable, nurturing family life together with their mother, but I'm starting to worry that perhaps we have shielded them from certain evils, and I wonder if I should be the one who brings those things up rather than them finding out on their own, basically.
Yeah, well, just first I want to say God bless you for shielding them, for being a father. That's what a father does. You know, he shields them from those kinds of evils. But there will come a time when they get to a certain age when you want to help them understand what they're going to be facing. And, you know, there's age appropriateness for whatever topic that you're talking about. You can get wisdom on how to do that, when to do it. But I'd say they certainly don't have to go out and experience them on their own, but you can give them insight and wisdom when the time is right that they can understand it.
You spoke so well. I think when children are young, they need to be protected, but we are preparing them for battle.
Yeah.
And so at a certain point in time, we're going to have to get them ready for battle and equip them so that when they're old enough and mature, and that's a judgment call that through prayer you and your wife can make together, and every couple has to make together. But I think you're very wise, and again, congratulations for the thoughtfulness you have in your fatherhood.
And we've been talking about obstacles we face personally, but we could switch that to the obstacles that our church is facing. Peggy asks, what are the persecutions the church is going through today?
I think one of the main ones is religious freedom is going on in this country, and I think the church is really struggling with that.
I think that we are struggling, and probably throughout the centuries, but right now struggling at a time where too many of our leaders themselves have not been evangelized. They don't really know the Lord and how to really follow Him wholeheartedly, and so it's a difficult thing when any of us struggle to follow the Lord, but when we're in leadership, we are held to a higher standard.
I think some of the persecution we're beginning to experience, it's small, but it's real, and it's seems to be picking up some momentum and steam. The Lord permits it to purify the church, and I think we've had a lot of lukewarmness. We've had a lot of compromise. We've had a lot of weakness. Our salt has gone flat. Our light's kind of gone dim. And the Lord permits persecution to happen. He prunes the church through that, because some people say, it's too tough, I'm getting out of here, I'm gone, I didn't ask for this. You know what, I thought this used to be good for business and fun to do. It's too hard now, the challenge. And so the Lord's looking for that body of people whose hearts want to be set on Him first. He wants to purify for the sake of those who are doing the persecuting. Mm-hmm. He wants His bride to be radiant and alive and in love with Him and living the faith, so they can be saved by the witness that people are giving. They can hear the gospel through the very life that we're living. There's a very muddied kind of message that's coming across, has been coming across for the past couple of decades in large portions of the church in the West.
You mentioned lukewarmness. I would think that apathy, just the fact that we take our faith for granted sometimes. This is the greatest gift we've ever received. Let's treat it that way. Let's talk about the obstacles of life in the final context here, the last word, starting with Peter.
I just want to say, as we were talking throughout the whole show, obstacles really are opportunities. And St. Paul looked at it that way, and he said he learned that they were opportunities. He expressed it this way. He said in Philippians chapter 4, verse 11, he said, not that I complain of want, for I have learned in whatever state that I'm in to be content. I know how to be abased, I know how to abound. In any and in all circumstances, I've learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and want. I can do all things in Him who strengthens me.
We want to first of all know the Lord. As we know the Lord, then we can know His promises. We see one of these great promises for those who know the Lord in Romans chapter 8, verse 28. He says, we know this, that God causes all things to work together for the good to those who love God and are called according to His purpose. What an amazing encounter. Everything in your life, if you come to know the Lord and you're following Him, everything in your life will work to the good.
You know, we don't need to tell you guys about obstacles out there. You've heard from us, but you know you're facing them. You have and you will continue to face them. What I want you to do, though, is sometimes it becomes overwhelming. Narrow it down. Say, what is the one major one that's really affecting my life? Go to the Lord and ask Him to give you the power and the strength to overcome it.
First things first. Thank you, Coach. Curtis, Peter. Next time on Crossing the Goal, we're going to talk about food, nutrition in life. See you here, right here on Crossing the Goal.